Good thing. I guess we're going to get started.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'm reminded we're on a tight schedule today with lots of action-packed presentations coming up. Just wanted to, it's a good crowd today, considering we had this great meal last night. I'm sure the meal was good, the company was good, and I'm sure it went on late into the night. So well done to those of you who've managed to sort of pull yourself up with the jet lag and everything else for this morning's session. Should be a good one. We've got a kind of ministry of talents here from various parts of the university. So we've got Paul Tagliabue, who all of you will know well, Chair of Governors. We've got Chris Metzler, Associate Dean from the School of Continuing Studies. We've got Bonnie Morris, who's Adjunct Professor with Georgetown. Alexis Lyras, School of Conflict Studies. And Jimmy Lynn from the School of Continuing Studies. So a good wealth of talent there. And this is sort of very important. I think all of you who spent some time in Doha in the last couple of days will have realised how important sport is to this country, how it's an integral part of the sort of economic platform and the sort of social development of the country. And Georgetown will be playing a very significant role going forward in the development of an events and sports industry in this country. So this is a huge opportunity to develop our relationship in Qatar and to be part of a very exciting project. I'll say no more because these people are capable of saying a lot more than me in a very sort of erudite way about what's going to happen here. So I'm going to welcome the panel up onto the stage. Chris will be the moderator. He will lead today's discussion. We hope it will be very interactive. We know there's a lot of interest in what's happening with the 2022 World Cup being possibly the best example of Qatar really showing its prowess on the sporting stage. So Chris will moderate, but please, when it comes to Q&As, ask your questions, and we'll have lots of experts to answer those questions. Thank you very much. No, just Chris in the middle.
Any all the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Music chairs?
Sorry.
Okay, good morning. So I'm going to begin by having each of the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Chairman Tagliabue.
Good morning. I'm Paul Tagliabue. I chair the board of directors at Georgetown. I've done a bunch of different things before doing that. I was practiced law. I was the commissioner of the National Football League, and most important of all, I went to Georgetown on a basketball scholarship, but I was also a student.
Okay, thank you. Bonnie?
Hi, I'm Bonnie Morris. I've taught in the Women's Studies program at Georgetown since 1996, and I developed a very popular course called Athletics and Gender, which is essentially a history of women entering sport, but also looks at the changing roles for men in sport, and that has consistently enrolled students from every team in the university and has been a very rewarding experience.
Thank you, Bonnie. Alexis?
Hi, my name is Alexis Lyras, and I'm originally Greek Cypriot, and which is also part of my identity that I felt that dealing with conflict, a country which is divided, and also the Greek origin with ancient Olympic Games, and these are the two main drives that brought me into the US and got my studies and my foundation, which basically was in 3 chapters. I would say the sport management part, the social change, how you can combine those two components by using the power of sport to promote social change. And I'm currently at the conflict resolution program at Georgetown University doing research, teaching, and service on sport and social change.
Okay, Jimmy Lynn?
Good morning. My name is Jimmy Lynn. I've worked in sports for about 24 years, including 14 years at AOL Time Warner, where I had the privilege of managing the NFL partnership with Commissioner Tagliabue. I left 4 years ago. I have my own sports consulting business, and I teach full-time in the sports industry management program in the School of Continuing Studies. And I've been on the adjunct faculty in the business school for 9 years, teaching a sports marketing class undergrad and an MBA class on social media. And lastly, I'm also Coach Thompson's professor who meets with the recruits, most importantly. My third year doing this. If you didn't know, Patrick Ewing, one of the 50 greatest NBA players, he's the all-time leading rebounder, but the all-time leading rebounder at Georgetown before Patrick Ewing was Commissioner Tagliabue.
All right, so we hope that this is going to be an interactive panel. Feel free to ask members of the panel questions at any time. I'm going to ask Chairman Tagliabue if he would like to bring some greetings on behalf of the university and in his role as the chair of the board.
Well, I want to greet everybody here, all the alumni, and also everyone here from SFS-Q. This is, I think, my 5th trip here to the Doha campus, and every time I come, I've been more energized and more impressed than any prior visit. And I'm sure that's going to be the case this week. I'm going to be here until Thursday doing a variety of things. But for the alumni also, I know some are from SFS-Q, some are from the main campus, and probably this is my 12th alumni event in about the last 3 weeks. So I've been in San Francisco, I've been in Southern California, I've been in Philadelphia, Boston, Miami, and elsewhere. But this is definitely the most interesting, and I know that most people have traveled the greatest distances to be here compared to any of the others. So it's a treat for me to be with everyone, and I welcome you and thank you not only for being present, for being such great supporters of the university.
Okay, and so leaning in on that point, Mr. Chair, I'd like to get your perspective on when a country hosts the World Cup and or the Olympics, what are some of the economic impacts that occur for that country, both during the event and post the event?
Yeah, you know, I guess I'll take the question sort of at 2 levels. Number one, if you look at it generally, I think the answer is it all depends on who the country is and how they handle the Olympics or the World Cup or a similar event. You can look at examples just in recent years, and I don't think you see any real clear pattern emerge, other than maybe in some cases it's going to be an investment that's a steep cost with a long-term return, and in some cases it's an investment with some more immediate returns. So you can compare, Athens with Sydney. You could compare Beijing with Atlanta. Every one of those Olympic situations is different. I think the World Cup situations are also very different one from the other. I'm on the board of a Brazilian company which is in the business of sports retailing online, and so I'm pretty close to what's going on in Brazil, and it's going to be very different from World Cups in Germany, South Africa, and the U.S. So I think the only thing they have in common is that they're all different, and the economic impact is going to be very different. Focusing at the second level on Qatar, I think here they have a very well thought out concept of what Qatar 2022 will do for the nation. It fits within the broader national plan, which has to do with Qatar becoming a knowledge economy and not simply a carbon-based economy. It has to do dramatically with environmental sustainability and energy efficiency. It has to do with developing, in terms of economics, developing not just a sports sector, but a tourism and hospitality sector, which in some ways is tied to the growing prominence of Qatar Airways in global air transport. So I think and then at a completely different level, I was here last November to speak at a conference about secondary education on a panel with some representatives of Qatar 2022, and clearly in that context, for the young people, not just of Qatar, but of the whole region, there's really important, a lot of importance attached to sport as an element of human development, and sports as an element of societal development, understanding collaboration, understanding teamwork, understanding respect, many of the things that other panelists are going to be talking about. So I think here there's going to be a very, very positive impact to hosting Qatar 2022 and other sports events which they're already hosting here.
Okay, so Bonnie, building on that, if we were to look at some specific impacts, especially based on your work in women's studies and your larger research, what do you guess some of those impacts would be? Whether it's human development, whether it's bringing different genders together, what's your view on that?
It's very exciting. I think, first of all, I love your phrase, the knowledge economy, because what I've been thinking about is how the location of the World Cup offers the opportunity to bring women into sports marketing and sports business, if not necessarily actual team competition. That is a very, very lovely and optimistic wedge for bringing women into what I call sports literacy. And the greatest changes I've seen in the past generation is the increased knowledge that women have about everything statistical in sport that used to be just boys' information in my earlier childhood. I see that in my students. What that means is that women are intimately involved in knowledge production and the roles that can be set aside for women. If they're not necessarily welcome yet, or if they don't fit culturally on the playing field, there's no reason we can't see burgeoning employment opportunities for women at all the different levels of publicity, travel arrangements, leadership in the aspects of sports business that are now extremely lucrative. So I feel very cheered by that. I also think that one of the goals I would like to see is greater knowledge on the Western side of local heroes, statistics, information. And one of the things I do on the first day of my class is ask my students, how many Arab sports heroes can you name? If you can name 5, I'll take you out to dinner. Still hungry. I note that we expect the rest of the world to know about American sports legacies. We do not extend reciprocal courtesy. So I think that that can really develop from the location of sports events here. And I think the more that that is broadcast, the more we dismantle borders and have a global sports literacy. That's the main thing I see as something that would unify everybody without offending anyone, and in the process derail stereotypes about who belongs in sport and who belongs in which sports.
Okay, good. So Alexis, part of your area of research is around the area of sports and diplomacy. So I'm going to ask you now to be both diplomatic and sportsmanlike, and answer the question: do you think either Qatar or the MENA region will receive the Olympics in the next couple of years? Why or why not?
First of all, thanks. It's great to be here, and I would like to say that trying to be diplomatic at the same time and see there was just for the history, there were Olympic Games back in the ancient times in the region.
Yes.
Which many people don't know that. It wasn't just the Olympic Games in ancient Olympia, but it was more the need of creating sport diplomacy, which was not just about the athletic performance. It was more about creating conditions for exchanging culture and identities and arts and theater and embracing the humankind. So in that context, I think, while I'm not in the decision-making committee, but I think the biggest challenge for Qatar which is fully aligned with the comments that we heard a couple of minutes ago, is to see how the biggest challenge to see how you can use the momentum to build a new concept of economy, which is not based on just financial indicators, that expands into human capital, social capital, and expands in the region, which is going to be more about not just the local human capital, but actually how do we create conditions for more cross-cultural social capital that is going to embrace the momentum and the potential of the region. So the biggest challenge for the Olympic movement, but for any event in the region, it would be safety and security.
Yes.
And I believe with the vision that Qatar has for the 2030 and the 2022, I think with the right, if we move the right direction, that we can create conditions to establish and to change the paradigm of how we practice sport and Olympic Games that will embrace those components.
Okay, so far what we've heard is the knowledge economy. We've heard the historical component. We've also heard the opportunity to introduce diversity. We've heard about economic impacts. And so putting all of this together then, what we have is Georgetown University SCS as having one of the largest sports programs in the world, ranked number 6 in the world. So Jimmy Lynn, I'm going to ask you, what's the vision of that program? And based on what you've heard, what are the alignments there that can be helpful on a global stage?
Thanks, Chris. It's great to see my 9 years at Georgetown. When I first started teaching the sports class, it was the one class taught, and to see what we've been able to build has been tremendous. So just as backdrop, the Sports Industry Management program is a master's in professional studies in the School of Continuing Studies. There are 450 sports management programs in the world, undergrad and grad, and we are the largest program in the world. Our model is a bit different in that we don't use full-time tenured faculty. We use all adjunct faculty working sports practitioners. So where Columbia University in New York is number 2 in the world in terms of adjunct faculty with 40, we have over 130. So we're a unique animal. Last semester we placed 81 internships. Again, that set a record. No one else has done that. And we really tried to focus, differentiate our program. So it's been global, it's been digital, it's been diversity. So I know we touched on diversity, and I'm proud to say 35 to 40% of our students are females. We have a number of female adjunct faculty as well. But the global part is the part that really excites me. How do we take this and take it outside of the U.S.? And so it really ties in well with what's going on. So we've been, I've been to Brazil 3 times this year with NBA students and the sports management students. So there's a lot there in Brazil with the World Cup and the Olympics. It's great here with what we're doing here with the campus here in Qatar, but then it also plays in beautifully with the vision of the program to grow Georgetown's presence in Asia. So with South Korea hosting the Winter Olympics in 2018, Tokyo hosting the Summer Olympics 2020, it's almost the perfect storm. We're going from Brazil to Qatar, in between is South Korea and Japan. So it actually works out well. So it's the global part and it's the digital part on the mobile that we'll get into.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, as you know, the Brazilians protested during the FIFA Confederation Cup this past summer. Do you think that we might see protests actually during the World Cup at the Summer World Cup in Brazil? And if we do, what implications does that have for the world? What messages does that send to the world? Is it an opportunity to vent? Is it an opportunity to build country? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the short answer in some ways, it depends on who's sending the messages. Because I paid attention to those protests to some extent from a distance. And I think, at least I came away with the impression that it was mostly about spending too much money on stadiums and focusing too much on sport and ignoring the needs of the neediest in Brazil. Subsequently, I've been in a number of meetings with Brazilians, and they had really quite a different take on it. They thought it was a very positive sign of the awakening of citizenship in Brazil. They felt that first of all, the people protesting covered the spectrum. They were not just people who were living on subsidies or in the favelas. They understood that was part of the issue, but just as important, they felt that it was the growing middle class in Brazil demanding that a democratic society should not have to put up with corruption of the kinds that are endemic still in Brazil. So they thought it was an extremely positive development. Now, the they that I'm referring to were not a group of people that I would have expected necessarily come to it with that point of view. There were business people, there were other people whose interests, short-term interests, were not necessarily served by those protests. Yeah. But they really felt that in the long term, it was an extremely positive sign of the maturing of Brazilian democracy and of engagement in a public which for years had no income, didn't pay taxes. Now they have income, they're paying taxes, and they're now demanding of government performance rather than corruption and misfeasance and nonfeasance. So if that reading is accurate, then if there were continuing protests, there could be lots of different messages.
Sure.
So I think it's like a lot of things, complicated when you're close up and simple when you're far away.
Dr. Metzler, if I may interject, I agree with everything the commissioner said, but there's also a big difference. I'm friends with a lot of Brazilians, and the social media impact is what's going to change, right? And so the fact that they're out there, what the police are doing when they're beating the people up, when they're taking the photos and the video, that's real. Yeah. That's real, and that's the negative impact that comes out, and that's where social media has that impact. And you know, there are going to be some really big issues there. And so I was there for the last summer when they had the Green Rio Plus 20 about the whole green initiative. Every major hotel where the dignitaries were staying, you had the Brazilian police out there with the big rifles and the show of force. And I was having dinner with the State Department, so we have the same type of security in the U.S., but they're just, you can't see them. Yeah. And so you can't have that show of force at the World Cup and the Olympics because, you know, think of the impact on the sponsors. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
But that comes back to what I said about who's sending the messages. I was in Brazil with my wife, and we went up to the great mountain where the statue of Christ sits over the city. Phenomenal. While we were up there, the Brazilian police had a raid on the tram that took us up there and arrested a lot of drug dealers. Yeah, that's good. In Brazil, it was like a positive thing because the police were doing their job. The international news was, don't go near Brazil because
yes,
you got armed gendarmes arresting people selling cocaine on the tram to see the Lord. So it depends on who's sending who's doing the tweets. We were lucky we were on the earlier tram. But still, you know, it's part of urban life in many parts of the world.
The drug train.
Yeah. So Bonnie, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this and just from a diversity perspective, from a who's doing the tweeting perspective.
Yes, social media.
Yeah, from a social media perspective. In this particular case, how do you view it?
Well, again, I seem to be the keeper of all things female, but I would urge that everybody take into account the very exciting frontier of expanding opportunities for women. I would say social media or the use of mobile devices, email, et cetera, is the great equalizer. It's a great equalizer because women have the potential in private to participate in the public sphere, yes? And that is a fantastic cultural convenience where you have traditions of sex segregation and let's say women aren't necessarily welcome in masculine spaces, including a stadium or an organized game, can nonetheless watch on their phone or participate in responding via social media and therefore be participants, but in a sanctioned way. This is very similar to some of the technological innovations that we saw after the Second World War when television, in entering the home, made it possible for women to attend sports games they might never have considered buying a ticket for in previous decades, and once again expanding sports literacy. I also would say that the potential to connect through social media has made it possible for women to talk more openly about their lives and their experiences, but also as fans to be taken very seriously as consumers. And I think there's no question, for instance, based on some of the amusing research that Nike was compelled to do, when they first opened Nike Town and everything was arranged to appeal to the male consumer, they quickly found women did most of the buying for the household, for the men in the home or in their lives, and they rapidly rearranged everything to appeal or be reachable for the imagined female consumer. That gave immense power to women as the people who were buying sports products. And that is increasing in terms of the usage of direct mail catalogs, which now, of course, we all get right through the phone. So that is empowerment in a way that is often not immediately seen. It's somewhat behind the scenes. But again, I mean, what interests me as a historian is the degree to which it is possible to combine the public and private spheres, and rather than keeping men and women entirely separate, we now have the technological means to incorporate women, and we also have the means to address private issues more publicly, and I think that's what y'all were addressing in terms of Brazil.
You know, to Bonnie's point, so the percentage of men that go to a soccer game or football game in Brazil is 89%. But the commissioner, you're on the board of Netshoes, top e-commerce company. But in Brazil, even though they target and market to men, 71% of the people that buy e-commerce in Brazilian are women.
Ta-da.
And percentage of social media are women. And so there's a whole change here. Now, on a separate, I don't want to open a can of worms, but I open a can of worms, and I ask you. I mean, look, what's going to happen to Sochi Olympics? It's only 2 months away.
Yeah.
With this whole LGBT issue and what's going on in Russia, I mean, there's a lot of athletes that are gay and lesbian, and you're not going to hold them back. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the social media blows up at the Olympics and the World Cup.
And that also is more of a potential both for boycott,
Yes.
but I think it's not necessary to think entirely in the negative. It's also
Sure.
important
Should
to
be
look
good.
at the power of what's been called the pink dollar, but which is a very important dollar.
Absolutely.
And so, Alexis, a diplomatic angle on this?
Diplomatic. Actually, there's no such a approach. So I truly believe that actually, if we talk about a true legacy and how we leave something behind, is how we can see how can we go beyond sport and see how can we have these components that we are talking about, use sport, the sport event as a platform to promote change before and after the show is over, which is a key, sustainable change, and see how you can transfer this excitement over time and space, not just during one event, which is the biggest challenge. And I think this is one of the unique dimensions and components that we have here with the commitment of Georgetown University into this vision and the role that we have into promoting sport and social change and economic development. I think there's a great opportunity here so that we can create something that is going to be unique and write history, a unique history into how we can use the power of sport to promote change. I think there are 4 dimensions that we are trying to invest on. Basically, the one is trying to move beyond sport. The second is how you use this platform, not just the sport event, but education and culture as the cutting edge, as the main pillars and milestones that we're trying to invest in, and have an ongoing interventions about to promote smaller changes over time and across space. And it's in caring and thinking and caring how we can have more sustainable models, which is not just going to be those who are good in sport. It's going to be very important to see what do we do for those who are not good in sport, or those who do not have the privilege to have access or to compete at that level. And I think with this vision, I think we can do something very interesting. The last point I'd like to make, which is basically also important in the legacy component, is having a great program, the Georgetown University in sport management, and having the academic credibility of Georgetown University, but also the giving back to the community culture. I think this is something that is actually, I just said it and feel the excitement and feel the chills. It's something that actually can change the relationship that academic institutions have into sport, but not just sport, but beyond sport events as well, which we're all excited to be here for that.
You know, I think there's a very interesting challenge for Georgetown and for all of us, because I think that there are 2 poles in the world in sport. One is a mostly Western perspective which is heavily focused on the commercial aspects of sport, including from the perspective of the athlete. Then there's another perspective, which, for lack of a better term, I'll call non-Western, which is focused much more on human development. Yeah. And it's not linked to commerce. In fact, it rejects commerce. I was in China in a discussion with a very senior group of Chinese officials, and the question that was being discussed was, does the Chinese public regard athletes as role models? There was only one person who said yes out of about 30. And there was only one role model that they pointed to. It was a woman who was the table tennis champ about 10 times in the world and had become the head of the new media company that was part of CCTV. Right. Everybody else felt that education and not sport was the way to human development, and they didn't link the two. India is another example. More and more people are pointing out they do not compete actively in the Olympics or in most other areas of sport, except for the professional piece, which is the Indian Cricket League, but they're aggressively pursuing an agenda of human development. And let's face it, they have some of the smartest people in the world in software and other sectors without any regard to sport. So there's a complicated tension there and a complicated challenge, which I think Georgetown can be very much a part of. And then look at our own sport, where college sports has become professional. So we've sold out to commerce in
I
the
don't want to
US.
sound like the Greek fat wedding that going back to the going back to the essence of the ancient Olympic spirit, and see how the cities were built actually. So there was the gym, and next to it there was the theater, and next to it talking about philosophy and science. So it was part of the genes of the society, of the community, a more holistic development, but also a caring community that was talking about dialogue and values and democracy. So it's not rocket science, it's how we integrate all pieces together again and see how we can see the community as an integrated part and see how we embrace those values and those components in a more, and create the synergies to actually reinforce those values and those attributes.
I would also say that some of what's been expressed here about the empowerment of the citizen or the reawakening of national pride, or the way that we might empower youth more actively, is the increasing popularity of blogging, which allows a chorus of narration, not restricted to the conventional elite core of journalists who determine how information was shared, and the fact that the private person is now enabled to blog their response to sporting events, their dreams, or that's a means through a university education or institution to train students to do social commentary. That has completely changed the way that we look at who is a writer, and that includes sports writing. And for years I've assigned the students in my class to keep journals, telling them that as athletes they are walking narrative texts, and that they're the ones who are the experts on their own lives, their training, or if they observe abuses in coaching or anything they want to address. And then as soon as I find a piece of writing that I think is publishable, I'll tell them, I'll help you get that out there, or blog that sucker, whatever. And I really think that that's a means of, again, breaking down boundaries where any person who has access to a computer is enabled to contribute an editorial about how sport is transforming their society, where they would identify a barrier or an injustice. That includes bringing more and more young people into the voices of narration, and it can only be a good thing for diversity and cross-cultural information.
So, Bonnie, it's going to be interesting. During the Olympics in 2 months, the IOC tries to control the athletes, right? And so not just blogging, but Twitter is just exploding among athletes, right? So the athletes are going to want to tweet during the Olympics, and the IOC won't want them to tweet. So it's going to be interesting, in the period leading up and then going on. But it's also about protecting the sponsors. And so the IOC wants to protect their sponsors, but a lot of the athletes are sponsored by non-Olympic sponsors, and they want to be out there. They want to be tweeting from Russia, right? And So it's going to be really interesting to see how the control happens or doesn't happen.
Well, we can always return to a system of carrier pigeons and smoke signals, but I think that people need to be able to express what's going on.
Okay, so we're going to end by asking the panelists to just give you parting words of wisdom. We're going to start with Bonnie and close out with the chairman. So,
Well, first of all, again, thanks for allowing me to be present here. What I have seen thus far from Georgetown students in particular makes me extremely optimistic that there are so many intending on careers beyond athletic performance, but in this exact kind of international development leadership that Georgetown has, I think, the highest percentage of students going in to teach for America is just an example of the service intention. In terms of what's going to happen here in 2022, again, what I'm hoping for is a great representation of women doing perhaps commentary, if not outright play, but hopefully working toward the possibility of greater involvement in the Women's World Cup as it continues to attract viewers, sponsors, and inspiring young women around the world. Also, I think we're going to be seeing much more of, again, attention focused on the athleticism that is coming from the Arab world, and a greater support of that, and a greater breaking of stereotypes in American culture. And I think sport is the right vehicle for that breaking of discriminatory stereotypes.
okay, thank you. Jimmy Lynn?
I have a mentor and close friend, Ted Leonsis, who's class of 77 on the board here at Georgetown. First generation college student, went on to become vice chair of AOL, and he owns the NBA and NHL franchises in Washington. He taught me how important it is to give back and help others, so I've spent the last 15 years doing that. So I do mentor a lot of first generation college kids at Georgetown through GSP and low-income kids in DC, because it's important. And to me, you know, one of our heroes just passed away, and so watching the news of Nelson Mandela this morning is just, to me, overpowering, because it talked about his love of sport, of Nelson Mandela being an athlete, and then what he did. I mean, what he did coming out of prison, and changing apartheid in South Africa, and what he did at the Rugby World Championships in 1995, putting on that uniform. I mean, you can't get any more powerful than that. And then to think that the last World Cup was hosted in South Africa. The last time he was seen publicly was at the World Cup being carried out, and the smile on his face. So that to me shows the power of sport and the power of change, and I think Georgetown is well positioned to continue to stake the global leadership.
Alexis?
Wow, it's, I think it's like I said, but it's not. I just, when I woke up at 3 o'clock U.S. time, no, Qatar
I just
time,
met him. I just met him, so it's not a setup.
Actually, I wanted to say something about Mandela as well, which is just a leader like Nelson Mandela believed in the power of sport as an equalizer, but actually at the same time as a vehicle to promote the change, but also mentioned that education is the more powerful weapon which you can change the world. And we can close with that. I think that's combining sport as an equalizer and as a power, as a vehicle, and as a tool for education to change the world. I think that's something very inspiring. And the two last things that I wanted to mention is, being at Georgetown, I feel that is a space where I can feel that heart, mind, and hands are in balance. So I can follow my passion about sport, but also do the academic part and do scholarship and research and challenge, but at the same time use my hands and connect with the community and try to give back and see how we can promote educational reform opportunities, that we can actually keep this balance between sport, education, and giving back to the community. I truly believe that with a vision, Jesuit values, Georgetown's framework and commitment to scholarship and giving back to the community can have a significant role in reshaping the rules of the game on how we see sport, and use that as a sport for social change, world-leading agency that is going to not only to be agents of how we can promote sport, good sport events, but actually how we can also promote economic impact, which is with the concept of economy with the human capital, the social capital, in balance with the community.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, your closing thoughts.
Well, I guess I think that there's a real need for greater clarity in thinking about sports. I think what you suggested as a framework, an analytical framework, and what Alexis suggested about identifying what are the problems would be a great place to start. The most valuable book that I know of when I'm trying to think seriously about the place of sport in education or society is a book written by Bart Giamatti, who was the president of Yale and a classic scholar, who for a short time was the commissioner of baseball before his death. And he talks about the different models of sport, including the Yale University model, which he compares with the Greek model and the British Academy of the 19th century and other models. So I would like to think that Georgetown is good enough to have the Georgetown model of leadership in sport. And I think it starts with some work that was done by, it certainly includes the work being done by all of you, but Dan Porterfield, who probably many of you know, did some wonderful thinking about sport, and he's now the president of Franklin Marshall, but I still steal his thoughts, and he's got a great piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which came down after the Penn State scandal, in which he said that sport at its core is life. It's a process of preparation, engagement, failure or success, reassessment, repreparation, re-engagement, failure or success. That's the rhythm of life. So if you take that kind of a core concept and then build from there and think about what that process of competing in sports is as an element of human activity, then I think you can really have some clarity coming out, and then you can think about diversity, and you can think about the most needy, and you can think about the commercial parts. But I think you really have to start with a real debate and some time of a consensus of what is sport in the context of human development and education. And I think Dan has given us a provocative hypothesis, which maybe all of you can test.
Absolutely. Thank you.